want to welcome you around the table with some really dear friends. I've known everyone here for a number of years, and they're wonderful people, and they're going to bless you today too. I want to start with Amanda. Amanda is a school teacher. She has a heart for kids that is so genuine. This is Nicole. Nicole is a mom. She's a wife. She's a business owner, and she's a go-getter. She loves people. Jonah, Nicole's husband and dad and business owner, they're entrepreneurs. But Jonah's got a heart of gold and truly a pastor's heart for people. This guy, I might have known a little bit longer than the rest of them. This is my husband, Mike. And he is my biggest cheerleader and supporter and challenger. IT professional, consultant, so his influence is in the corporate kind of world right now, has been for a number of years. Rob Moga, and Rob is also a professional. We have seen Rob really love some employees through some really hard times. He cares deeply about the people that he works with and has taken this message to heart. And this is Kim Vastine, a very good friend of mine I've known for a number of years, that is an entrepreneur, minister, author, everything. Like, Kim does a lot. And she works in the corporate world as well as the ministry world, but she ministers everywhere she goes. And she cares deeply about people. Everybody at this table has that in common, that they care about people. And the expression of that and the different audience of who that is has taken on a different look for each one of them. But they're going to share what that looks like with this message in particular in their world today. All right. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. I love you all, my friends, and we're going to share our stories with you today. We've all been impacted by the message of loud is not a language. And to make it clear, what loud is not necessarily volume. Loud is an attitude that shuts people down, shuts people out, silences people, and shames people for having different perspectives. And so that doesn't communicate well. And the Lord is showing us how to communicate in a way that honors Him, that builds relationships, that gives us greater influence and helps us to communicate more effectively. So we're going to share some stories with you today. And I am going to start with the question, what was your biggest takeaway from the book? Let's just start with that.
I think the biggest takeaway for me as a teacher has been that kids are not respected, that are in chair. Kids are not respected, and we don't give them a voice to listen to. I think kids have a lot to offer and say. And as a teacher, it really gave me that understanding that they need to be heard if they're going to respect you and behave in a way that you expect them to, especially as a teacher or maybe a parent, youth pastor, whatever you are. And so I think for me, that was a huge takeaway.
That's great. Listening to them so that they will listen to you. I mean, so that could be manipulative, but with the right heart posture, right? We're listening to people authentically, wanting to hear them. And that is reciprocal where they listen to you, right?
Yes. And the listening to understand. And I think that's the biggest part of how kids are not heard. Adults tend to just give kids somewhat of a command and control. And I've learned that that doesn't work. I've been in classrooms where I've had major behaviors and I went the route of command and control. But when you actually listen to kids to understand why they are the way they are, their perspectives, what's going on, you understand them more. And if you are being loud, like you said, you gave us the definition of loud, but I didn't realize that it was such a place where full of, it can be anger, and it's not safe for kids. And safety is what kids need a lot of today. Yeah. And it kind of hit me like I wasn't giving my students that. And, like, I feel like I have come a long way, and it has helped me tremendously.
Okay, I love that you said that because I know you, and I know that you are a safe place for kids, and so the fact that what you realized was not necessarily. I think you tell me if I'm hearing this right. It's not that you weren't a safe place for kids; it's that your actions weren't showing them that you were a safe place, right? Yeah. Because in your heart, you're safe. Because I know you're safe. I know you, and I know you love children. But our actions make a difference in that, in other people knowing that. Yeah, that's a great point. You can be like, well, I'm safe. But if we don't take the steps to make sure other people know that, they don't know that. Thank you. That's awesome.
I'm going to piggyback on that because I would say that was what stood out to me most as well, is listening in order to understand. Even at a deeper level, it was convicting. There was a humility piece in when you do that in a conversation that kind of sets your message to the side and you're listening to someone else. And so it just convicted me of things that you've always kind of known. You know you're supposed to be slow to speak and quick to hear and all these things, but I think this book gives you some practical tools and vehicles to remind yourself before going into a conversation to listen, to understand the person, not just to be able to reply to them.
Yeah, and that kept standing out to you throughout the book, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, that made an impact on the way you so what have you done differently because of that?
Well, so it's interesting. Recently, I had a conversation with a longtime friend of mine. We've done some ministry together, and part of our relationship is we would have very lengthy, deep theological conversations. And it's interesting. I noticed this just from our last conversation, and I think it has a lot to do with the attention that this book has put on being slow to speak and trying to understand what someone else is saying. What in our relationship, and I'm trying to keep this as condensed as I can, but we would have very lengthy conversations, and because we're good friends, that would turn it a little competitive in a sense. I don't know if you guys have experienced that, where it's like, okay, you got to understand what I'm saying here, and I'm going to work really hard to win my point of view. And what I noticed after our last conversation, and this was something that I would do unconsciously in a way, after our conversation, I would kind of rethink through what I said and did I win? Could I have said it differently to convince him better? And so I found myself doing that again this last time, but something stopped me. And I think it was just because this was in my mind. And I thought, wait a minute, what did he say?
That's good.
And to my shame, I couldn't really remember because I was so focused on what I said.
What you wanted to say.
Yeah. And so I really hope that that's a lesson that I can apply going forward, because the next conversation I have, my goal is to be, okay, what is he saying? Let me really listen to what he's saying. That's a real life application that happened very recently.
That's good. And I think we all do that, right? It's like, I really want you to hear what I'm saying, and they may be quiet and looking at you, but inside they're like, I wish you'd shut up because I want you to understand what I'm saying, and I can't wait till I get my chance. So, yeah, we all do that. But it causes you to be more aware of it, right? I mean, just like understanding this process causes you to be aware that you're doing it and just step back and pause like you did.
I think for me, having been engaged in, business, church arena, nonprofit, it doesn't matter where I've been, even in other nations. Someone very wise said, we are only as strong as the weakest among us. And in our culture, especially, I could speak mainly for America, our culture is very much focused on individualism versus collectivism. So we have this entrepreneurial spirit. I'm going to compete. I'm going to be the best in the business. I'm going to be the best church with the biggest woo-wah, whatever it is. And we want the best and the brightest. And we create oftentimes these cultures of the performance over people.
Yeah.
And even not, I think that's the best way to put it for me is the performance over how people are valued in the process, how they are given opportunity to really bring who they are safely to the table. Because I've been in so many environments and I've created environments that were not safe, as well as it was modeled for me. I lived that growing up.
Yeah.
You were seen and not heard. So for much of my life was no voice at all. And then you grow into the place where, my voice matters. My story matters. In fact, it matters so much that you have very strong opinions about everything. And I lived with loud is the language.
Yeah.
And that's almost all I've seen in the world. So this message, Brenda, challenged me deeply in my relationship with my husband, with my kids, with my clients, with the ministry that I have. Like, what keeps people silent? And even in coaching, we know that we're coaching to let them tell their story and to be understood. But when it comes to things that really matter to me personally, like for our culture, our society, I felt my spirit being very loud and often even offended in settings where only one side was allowed to have an opinion or a story. But the other side, even in our news media today, it's polarizing everybody's right to have a voice in the story. It often slants towards one side and vilifies the other side. And people are becoming that more and more. So I see the alarm going off in our own nation when we look at the story of Rwanda and the genocide, and coming against each other when we live next door to each other. Right. And it's really, you said the word, Rob, convicted. It's just really gripped me in a very powerful way in my conversations with my husband, in the people that I do life with. We were at an event, a couple weeks ago, and I shared with Brenda, we were out with some friends one night having a meal, and I found myself at one point in the conversation, I was so excited about what I wanted to share, and I cut off the very end of what you were saying, and it immediately came flooding back to me as I thought about it later that night. Like, there I was. I felt like I wanted to get in my piece of insight on that or whatever. And I apologized to her the next morning. She's like, what? I didn't even hear it. What did you say? But it gripped me because, again, just reading the arrogance that we can have in our own perspectives is very humbling. And so I feel like this journey is a really, and you said it well, a journey of humility.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And courage. Yeah. To face the hard things in ourselves and what we see happening around us.
That's really good. And I think it's great because I think I was probably through with what I was saying and you just didn't realize I was, because I honestly didn't remember that. Yeah. But the cool thing about that is that there's an awareness there internally to go, wait a minute. And we're checking ourselves more, like I'm checking myself more. Am I listening? Am I listening to understand? I think that's great, even though I wasn't aware of it. It was still a good thing that happened, like inside of you, right? And you mentioned that in growing up, loud was a language. And I've heard, there's so many people who have told me that the very same thing, that, or in my house, that is the language. Loud is the language. And I just want to go, it's really not. It might be what you're speaking, but it's not the language, because language is designed to communicate thought back and forth effectively. That's what it's designed to do. And so if you're yelling at each other, you're not, or you're having that loud attitude, whatever it is, you're not communicating thought effectively back and forth. And so I think just also to redefine, not just to redefine loud, but to be sure we understand when we're talking about language, we're talking about a way to communicate thought effectively and respectfully. That's what makes it effective, right? I mean, if it's disrespectful, it's not effective. Yeah. So
brings me to think about, for me, it was two things. Listening to understand, like we all said that, right? But the biggest thing I think that I got out of it is that I didn't realize that I don't even really know how to listen to myself. Like I have so much loud going on inside of me that in my family, when we would have conversations, we cut each other off like the whole time. Like you're saying, like loud is a language, like nobody finishes a sentence. And I'm always a million miles an hour. You can ask my husband, like in my brain. And so I just realized like I don't know how to listen sometimes to myself. And as a result, when I'm in a conversation with someone, I'm trying to get my thoughts out so that I can like process them. And so then I realized, oh, wow, I thought I was good at listening, kind of, and then I was like, man, I'm terrible at listening. And it wasn't a bad thing. It was like a conviction, I knew like the Holy Spirit was like, yeah, this is something that I want to work on so that I can heal you. And then your conversations can be more fruitful. And so that's kind of something that I those two things are what I learned.
yeah.
I wrote down something very similar. I wrote, when you find yourself talking at someone rather than with them, loud doesn't just silence who you're talking at. It silences your own ability to understand.
Wow, that's so good.
That's good.
Because I think that's exactly what I'm trying to say there. Because you get so caught up in the words and again, maybe winning or losing, you're no longer understanding. And that's where this is drawing attention to listen, not just to hear, but to be able to take it in.
Yeah, that's good. Yes, because communicating we think communicating is about talking. And so many times, and it's about talking and listening, that's the communication, that's the back and forth. But so many times what I have realized is that when I'm listening to understand, the conversation that I think is going to go this way turns and goes this way because I'm hearing what they say and I'm responding to what they say instead of the agenda I have inside of me. And it goes the right way, Like I thought it needed to go this way and it just gets taken a different way. And it's because of respect. It's because of a love that we're showing other people, right? I mean, some of you have shared this. If anybody hasn't and you have something, I love that you shared how your heart's been challenged through it. And so one of the things with Loud is Not a Language is that the first blueprint it talks about is the chair, like pull up a chair, like we've done here, pull up a chair and let's have a conversation. Let's listen to one another. If we can keep that in our minds when we're going into a hard conversation, that, I'm going to go in with the attitude of pull up a chair. I want to listen to what you have to say, which is not how we normally go into hard conversations. But if we do, that chair is that acronym for courage, humility, authenticity, integrity, and respect. And so those 5 things really, when you sit and you're like, do I have the courage to enter this conversation with a heart of humility, being completely authentic with the right heart motivations so that I am operating in integrity, and I can look at the person across from me and truly respect who they are as a person, even if I don't respect the stance that they're taking. So for me, one of the things that was the biggest thing was that understanding doesn't require agreement. That was huge to me because I think we don't enter into conversations sometimes because we think, well, I don't know, if I give ear to that, they're going to think I agree with that. And so I'm just not going to even listen.
Then you're going to lose.
Then you're going to lose, yeah. We don't want to lose. But yeah, even when you mentioned that about winning and losing, if we tend to think if we get all of our words out, we've won. But if we didn't influence anybody and if we didn't better the relationship, we really didn't have any influence at all. So, yeah. Heart challenges. Have you all had any heart challenges in dealing with this?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Absolutely. Just going off of what you just last said. So my father and I have had a chaos relationship for my entire life. So he's a severe alcoholic. We've never had a good conversation. And I had just visited the Harkins, and I had come home and something big had happened at home, and it was time to have a conversation with my father. And I had just finished a couple of chapters of your book, went over to their house to talk, and as I'm walking up to him, some of the book came into my head, and I'm thinking, how am I going to start this conversation without it getting loud? You know? Mm-hmm. And I'm good at getting loud, especially with that man. And he's good at getting loud with me. So there's never been a conversation that we've had that hasn't gotten loud. Mm-hmm. And so that's our go-to. And it's just habit. And as soon as I walked up to him, I'll admit it. That's the first thing. I was like, I'm just going to get bigger and louder than he is. And that way he'll just be quiet and we don't have to have a long conversation. Mm-hmm. But instead, I just, calmed myself down and I asked myself, have I ever really heard this man speak? Mm-hmm. Like, as much as I don't like him, have I ever really heard the words that he said to me? And so I just really just sat there to listen. And I asked him some pretty big questions. And he was caught off guard, which caught me off guard. The way he was looking at me, he was waiting for me to get loud. He was waiting for me to, put him down in some way. And instead I was just like, tell me more. And it was like, for the first time in my life with my father, I had asked him questions to understand where he was coming from. And he was like, who are you? And I was like, yeah, what's going on? Who
am I?
I was like, I don't know, And we didn't yell at each other. We didn't call each other names. We didn't bring up the past. We just talked about what was going on in that moment. And for the first time, I was looking at him, and the relief that I saw in this man about being able to say what he wants to say. And he didn't yell at me. First time he didn't yell at me. And so it just came all together. And I think the perfect thing about the book is like, it's a process. It's not just like you read this book and you just get it. No. Like, I did one thing, which was like, I just wanted to have enough humility to be able to say, like, you're more important in this conversation than what I have to say. Wow. And it just turned everything around. And we've had some pretty good conversations since then.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I know that's incredible because I know the story. Yeah. That's amazing. And you said that you walked away. I wish I could remember exactly how you told me. You still didn't agree on anything.
Not one thing.
But you knew you loved each other.
Yeah. I knew he loved me.
That's amazing. That's beautiful right there. Didn't agree on a single thing, but you knew he loved me. Wow.
For me, the C in the chair, which is courage, I found quite challenging. And I had to spend a lot of time on it because I have a habit of, it's not courage, but actually avoiding tough topics when I don't want to. And also, a lot of times with those people where it's a tough topic, you can't necessarily avoid talking to the person, but I realized, and it forced me to realize that there's times where I can guide the conversation into safe spaces where there won't be conflict, and really it's accomplishing nothing. It's a lack of courage. And so, yeah, I've spent a lot of time going like, okay, I need to have the courage to face these things. If they're things that really need to be, if it's somebody with whom you have a relationship and you want to have a better relationship, then I really need to step up. But in a way like you were just describing, Jonah, do it in a way where I'm really listening to the other person, but I'm not avoiding it. I'm having the courage to deal with it.
Yeah, that's good. And I love the definition of courage that is determining what is more important than the fear or the doubt that you face. Like, that's really what courage is, like determining what's more important than that and then moving toward it. So like in those hard conversations, why would I step into this? What's more important than allowing it to stay as it is, and expressing that love to your father just by listening was huge. Yeah. What you do with your students, even with yourself, talking about, just getting quiet and listening, all of that. So, yeah, that's one of the practices I've started trying to do is just where is courage needed? Where am I feeling like I need to back away? Where's, what would be more important than me backing away? And then getting a really clear vision on that. And then I wish I could remember what you just said, humility. That was such a great example that you gave. You were looking at your father thinking, he's more important than what I have to say right now. Is that what you said? Yeah. That goes along with what you said too about people and how we will let performance be more important than people. Yeah, it's just to look at people and go, you're more important as a person than what I have to say, than me getting my point across, than me winning. Yeah. All of that's big. This could shift so many things in our world.
I was going to say on the topic of influence, because what you said was very good and what you said was very good. When we think about the influence that we have, we want to accomplish something. And I think for me, sometimes I get into that space where I don't have the courage to have those hard conversations. And when you're not in that safe space, I think that's what leads me to not have that courage and growing up in a place of not having that safe space. So that just switched my mind to, I need to make sure that I am influencing these kids in the right way. And if their performance is more important than them, then I'm accomplishing nothing. And so much of education today is performance driven. In the business world, in the ministry world, it's performance. Are you doing this? Are you doing that? How many numbers do you have? And so I love that, if we don't have that courage or we are being loud, we're not going to have that space at all of influence.
Right.
So,
yeah, and it seems really counterintuitive sometimes if you need to hit these numbers. You got to get this. We've got to get these test scores up. I've got to make these sales, whatever. And those are real life situations that are real and we have to do it. But there's I guess it's a God truth, I don't know, that it's like when you value the people you're with more than that, then the test scores go up and the sales are made and all of that, right? Because without people, there isn't business anyway. And so when we can build foundations that are really built on trust with people, everything else falls into place. Everything else works. It's just, prioritizing people works.
I think one of the most challenging verses in Scripture is in Philippians 2, where it says, consider others better than yourself. I think that's easy to say, but really hard to do. And I think what's interesting to me, even in the rest of that chapter, we also have that passage where it says that Jesus, even though he had the form of God, did not consider it equality with God to be something that he grasped.
Yeah.
Instead, he emptied himself and took the form of a servant. And so that, to me, is what courage is. I mean, that's our greatest example of courage, is the Son of the living God emptying himself of who he is to hear someone else and serve them. And to know that the verse before that is consider everyone better than yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I actually did a study on that at one point. And it goes along with a saying we've probably all heard. It's like, it doesn't mean, so that humility doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking of yourself less, thinking of other people more. And especially in those certain situations. So I love that. Thank you.
Can I say one thing too about courage? Like, we talk about courage because I don't like conflict either. So I have the same thing as Mike, where I do not, that's the last, I'll deal for like a month with it until I figure out all the right words. But another thing that's hard too, like from where I come from, is the courage to trust people. And like you were saying about like how we're such an independent culture, like when you grow up and like, you have friends or family, which all of us do, that like say things, over time you're just kind of like, oh, I can't really trust people. So Jesus trusted, he trusted, the disciples. He knew they were going to fail him, but just the courage to trust and let people in and know that, like, if you don't know them, you're going to give them the opportunity. That's something God showed me while reading this book. Because I have very few people, you guys are some of them, that I trust. And he's just like, it's time to start opening your heart and like, got to deal with that, whatever it is, and let me heal it. And I can heal it through people. And he's shown me that, having the courage to trust in some of my relationships, like even our marriage, like the more that we trust each other, the more we let each other in, even when it's hard, it's healing for you. So.
That's very good. I know for me that I'm seeing loud differently than I did before. Loud is not just that volume. It shows up in really surprising ways. And for me, one of the things that I've realized that's really, really loud is passive aggression. Or when somebody just gives you the silent treatment and shuts you down. You don't think of silence as being loud, but that attitude, that feel, that energy that you get around them is like, ooh, what is happening? So a lot of things are loud in the definition of it shuts people down, it shuts people out, it silences them, or it shames them. And so I'm just curious how you all have seen loud maybe differently than you would have before, understanding this method.
So one of the most painful periods of recognizing passive aggression in my life and awareness of it was in a ministry position that I was in and had a lot of responsibility. But the leadership chose a posture of no communication at all, not even loud communication, but no communication for such a lengthy period of time that it became this loud roar, which created enormous fear inside of me, almost a paralysis of functionality. And I felt so invaluable to that particular community setting and leadership. And it was a pattern that was modeled by the leadership as a whole, because it was very uncomfortable to have honest conversations. And I would have valued that so much more, to know where the divide was coming from, because I had no clue. Same thing in my family of origin. It's interesting, in a loud environment growing up that was physically, verbally loud, how it affected each one of us as siblings so differently. One became overtly harsh and aggressive, loud, physically, all the above. Another one became very, very quiet. But as that relation, as we grew into adults, it manifested into a passive aggression that was probably some of the most violent relational interactions, and literally violent. It literally shut our entire family, broke them apart, created such a wall, like literally we are cutting you off. And no one had no clue as to why and how, but that was their way of finding their voice. But shutting everyone else to not even have the conversation, to come to the table and say, you're worthy of sitting at the table and let's talking. And so, yeah, to having experienced that, both extremes in life, I think I would say that passive aggression has been the most painful encounters. And I can't say that I have never engaged in that myself, but I tend to be just the opposite by nature. Is Bible talks about peace, being a peacemaker, but there's a huge difference between being a peacemaker and a peacekeeper.
Huge difference.
They're miles apart. Peacekeeping says, like the UN, we're going to observe and we're going to watch, but we're not going to engage. We're going to report on it, but we're not going to engage. Peacemaking says, I am willing to get in and get messy into this conversation because it is destructive and destroying and it matters. But how we do that, again, your book really reinforced in my own heart conversation why, when I'm tempted in any setting, like, do I really want to invest in that or not? But your point of why has it not been important for me to want to influence on a more positive way than to just take the safe route and say, that's not my game. That's not my issue. I'm not able to influence that. But really, it's an inward decision. You don't want to influence it. And that's been really deeply, that's changed me in this, to see the value of influencing people that I really didn't have any interest in influencing before.
Wow. That's good.
Yeah.
That's
It's changing
good.
me.
Yes.
To want to influence for a better reason and to get in the game.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. Has anybody else seen anything with Loud showing up differently than you would normally have thought of what Loud shows up?
Well, when I think of Loud and what it used to be, one thing that I felt was Loud towards me, because I'm also a server in a restaurant, is criticism. Criticism is so loud. And as a server, when I would mess things up, I would be that person that didn't have that courage to come and say, hey, to my manager, I messed this up. Can we fix it? Or I would avoid going to my tables. Or I would be like passive aggressive. Well, you didn't tell me this, or blah, blah, blah. And so now I think about it, it's like, if I do something wrong, I just have to own it, which is another part of the book.
Good.
You got to own it. And now that I've seen that, I am able to operate in a totally different way. I'm able to receive that criticism in a totally different way. And I use it to take action and grow.
That's so good. Yeah, I love that you brought up the own, because when you can own your journey that you've been through and the biases that you have, that we have, because we think of other people as having biases, not ourselves, but yet we all do. And when we take the time to own it and I know where this is coming from, then, it's just that short little pause that we can take and then move forward and go, okay, I know where that's coming from. I'm going to set that aside and do what's needed in the situation. I love it.
Yeah, I would say the best thing about Loud is that it can be relearned. Mm-hmm. So for me, even in the past 3 days, I was at a conference and there was a specific person who was in charge that kept telling me, hey, tell your face that you're in a bad mood. I was like, what do you mean? I don't understand what that means. And so now I've come to realize, and my lovely wife has told me this a lot, is that like when I walk into a room, I'm like searching around for what's going to go wrong. Mm-hmm. And I want to pinpoint everybody who's in the room, and I want to see what you're capable of. I'm just like ready for war, because that's what I come from. So my face is not smiling. I'm not like, hey guys, let's go to war, It's like I'm like almost scowling, and sometimes I can feel it. And I didn't realize how loud that was, and I didn't realize that. I mean, people were coming up to her during the last 3 days and saying like, is your husband okay? Like, and it's like, because my face is so loud and, the scowl is so loud. And so, relearning how to walk into a room and smile and shake someone's hand. And I've always been taught, don't speak unless you're spoken to. So usually people take that as like, oh, he doesn't want to talk to me. And that's really loud as well. So like, it's possible to relearn, and it's a process for sure. It's something you have to do every single day and relearn how to do that. And I mean, I caught myself almost doing it when I walked into this room, but I was like, all right, I'm here with people I love. So like, I'm all right. So yeah.
Wow, that's good. So really, when you say you walk into a room and you're looking like you're ready to go to war, basically you're checking it out to see, is this a safe place?
Yeah.
Right?
And I want to be the loudest person in the room without saying a word. I want everyone to know that like, if stuff goes down, I'm going to be the one that walks out, you know, and not like I'm intentionally thinking that, but I can feel my body shift.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a learned behavior that you can unlearn, like you said. That's good.
And for me, I think loud, like I was saying about listening, like is my thoughts. I thought loud was like, like speaking loud or like talking over people. But I realized that even with my relationship with God, like stuff that he spoke to me at NLE and, places in my life where he spoke to me that he loves me and he's downloaded in me, and that the loud would be me just listening to my thoughts more than receiving what I know was spoken over me. Because they're so loud sometimes, it's like, it's so easy because they come with emotion, right? So these loud thoughts that are attached to past or, pain or whatever, those are easier to like hear. They're so loud. I'm so used to them. So to hear, you're loved, you're going to do great things. It's like, okay, really, like the things around me too are loud. Like circumstances can be loud. And so learning to hear God's voice, like his silent voice, knowing that that's so much more true than like the circumstances around me.
Yeah, attitude and tone. I mean, just the simplest things. Somebody can be talking to you and, you can look them in the eye and with a receptive look, or you can put your head down and go shaking your head, no. And then, also with your tone, you can come across as sarcastic or whatever. There's so many subtle ways that are loud in that they're shutting down the other person, and because you're communicating to them that you're really not listening, and you're not.
Yeah. So if you were to talk to somebody about this loud is not a language method, why is this method important or different? Or, how is it different from just learning good communication skills? Because a lot of us have learned, look somebody in the eye when they're talking, those kind of things. Well, I can look you in the eye and listen to you, but inside I'm thinking, when's he going to shut up? I'm not listening, like that's not a good communication skill. It's performance, right? It's performance. And sometimes communication skills can be that. So have you all seen a difference in how is this different than just that?
Okay, so one of the things I would say is examine my motives before a conversation, because there's so often when I've kind of planned out and play over in my mind, okay, here's how I'm going to do it, here's how I'm going to win, as opposed to saying, okay, I don't understand why this person thinks the way they do, and just going in with a perspective. I want to understand why they think this way, because it is so foreign to me or different from how I think. And so I really want to understand. I still may not agree with them, like you said, but I want to find out what their life experiences are. That's something that you talked about. And that gives you so much perspective.
Yeah.
Just approaching important, tough conversations from that, rather than planning out how I'm going to win, to just going in with that perspective. I want to understand what happened in their life that I haven't experienced, because the book talks about that finding out, okay, what happened in their life that caused them to have the perspective that they do.
Yeah. Because a lot of times, if I had lived through things that others have lived through, I may have the very perspectives that they have too, you know? And to be able to go, well, I don't hold that perspective, but I do see why you do, you know? There's a level of respect and trust when we do that with one another that builds relationships with people we would never think we would have a relationship with, but it makes a way for ongoing influence, you know, both ways. So,
I think you mentioned this earlier about being aware of your bias. I think that your bias will affect how you understand so much, and taking an inventory of that, you know, as you were saying, checking your attitude of acknowledging what the bias is, I think can get it out of the way where it's not distracting you from listening to what the person is saying.
yeah.
And then the second thing I was going to say is as to why this is a different method or it helps when we're talking about communication. You know, a big part of that is you've got to know your audience. You know, they say that all the time when you're speaking, or it helps to know who you're talking to. And I think CHAIR and the acronyms here are tools to help you be more aware of who you're talking to and listen and understand. That will help you influence, because now you can adjust your message. And this gives you tools. That's one of the things I like about this. It puts legs to these ideas, because we've heard some of them, but this puts some practical vehicles to apply in communication.
That's good. Yeah. It's not just the doing part of these are the skills you learn and this is what you do. It's like the being part of this is who I need to be in order to enter into this and do these things well. Yeah.
I agree. I think it's also the why. Well, why are you having this conversation? Your motives. But I know that if you come in with that different approach and people seem seen and heard, it builds those bridges. It builds that bridge of trust. It builds that relationship, and that leaves room for growth. Because I always tell my students at the beginning of the year, ever since like this past year, because I've known Brenda for a little while and she just lives these things out and it's very amazing. So like this past year, I told my kids, if you ever don't feel seen or you don't feel heard or you feel like you haven't been able to tell me what you need to, let me know. Because number one, I'm allowing them to check my biases and I can find that. But with your family, with coworkers, with business, if you build those bridges, you're going to want to work with each other more. You're going to work better. You're going to, if you know somebody cares because you're building those bridges of trust and relationship and they feel seen, then I think that so much more is going to get accomplished in so many different aspects. Yeah. So that's how I feel that loud is not a language is different than just communication skills, because communication skills tends to be like, this is what you need to do. And loud is not a language is, this is why I care.
That's good. Yeah.
And I was thinking of that too, communications, and I took public speaking. And it's like, it's more external. It's about what you look like. Yeah, you're supposed to know your audience, but you don't have the time, especially in like public speaking. So this is more internal. It's about the heart. That's what makes loud is not a language different. It's about even learning how to communicate and find those biases and know like how you can actually have better relationships, not just communicate so that you can be good at it and you can get to the top, but to know how to have healthy, real good, deep relationships. So that's what makes loud is not a language different.
Yeah, and for me, I don't know if that answers the question, but my dad, I had hundreds of conversations with him, and that was the first time he had told me he loved me since I was 7 years old.
Sure.
And so, like, that's my proof behind the book. and I had only read a couple of chapters. So it's like I've tried everything else. I've tried being, getting crazy and being wild with him, and it just never worked. And then I had just read the book and tried it. I just tried it. And I mean, he told me he loved me for the first time since I was 7. I'm 36 now. So, that's how I feel about it.
That's a big deal. Wow. Anything else anybody wants to share?
Yeah, I'd love to say this, that whenever I read a book that feels like it's provoking transformation inside of me, I'm always thinking about, who do I need to share this with? Like, who would really just really get this and want it? And I met a new friend within the last 2 weeks, and she's an author, and she's a writer, and she's a counselor, and but she works for a corporation, and they hired her in about a year ago because of her top talent. And then her story to me, as I sat and listened to her story, was they brought me in for all of these abilities and skills and capabilities that I had. And then for a year, I've been nothing but muffled and silenced and belittled and, put in a corner with no ability to bring what they hired me to do. And she just talked about, how miserable and painful. So it all came to a head. And last weekend, she put in a resignation. The next morning, she gets called in by the CEO and says, "You can't quit. We need you. Like we need what you bring." And she laid out very courageously what had shut her down and why she had to move on. And now they've given her a position literally overnight to actually be like third in command in the company, to come in. And I was telling her the other day, you're the influencer that can change the culture of the company to see that people matter. And when you don't create safe spaces. So I said, it's going to be probably one of the most challenging jobs now that you've ever had, because to go in and have the courage to, with what you've experienced and seen, this tool right here will help you when you're confronted with the in-your-face, obstinate response to your changes. Again, it's going to be, what is the motivation of your heart for it to see people according to their heart, and to train everyone, like to see people's worth, value, and dignity, where the only thing that has been really promoted, as we talked about earlier, was performance. So this tool, Brenda, that's like, it needs to be heard. Like, it's a liberator. It's a liberating tool to really raise the value and the dignity and the worth of anybody that we haven't to come. And for leaders to get this, it has the greatest power to change entire organizations. Yeah. And then what do? If they learn it at an organization, they're going to take it home. Mm-hmm. Because it becomes a part of you. And then that's that ripple effect that when we talk about, how do I change the world, right? Mm-hmm. One person at a time, the starfish right in front of me. But gosh, when you've been given a place of influence, this is such a needed tool to train your inward heart to be able to see others' hearts and to have the courage to change on a bigger scale.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I agree 100% with that. And I feel like I've seen so many turnovers in the restaurants that I've worked in and schools that I've worked in. I had a friend that just retired and has come back, and her reason was like, I can't come back. I can't do toxic again. And people don't leave the job. They leave the toxic environments. And when Loud is there, it's toxic. And we have like you said, the tool to take away that toxic. And again, it's going to change organizations. You're going to have, employee retention because you care. Yeah. So I just 100% agree with what you said.
Yeah. I love it that you do, because I do too, with all of my heart. I believe it can, for people who really get it and embrace it. And I'm just so grateful, like you guys sitting here at the table do. Like you didn't just read a book, you embraced it. And it's shifting parts of your culture where you are, where you live, in your homes, in your places of business. And I do believe that it can shift culture if we will take it to heart and let it do and hear what it needs to do. So thank you so much for coming, for sitting around the table, for talking about how it's impacted you. I know that what you've shared will impact others. Thank you.